This page is the front cover of issue 53 of N64 Magazine from April 2001. Blimey, look at that, it's got Conker's Bad Fur Day plastered all over it with a big, "First UK review," splashed across the front. "We tame the N64's sickest game." It says, they weren't kidding about that game being a bit naughty for Nintendo, were they? The cover is screaming, "Explicit squirrel warning," twice, just to be sure you get the message. Looks like they've reviewed a few other games too: Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, Mega Man 64, and Scooby-Doo, all with page numbers. They're also tipping us off about Sin and Punishment and Donald Duck further inside, again with page numbers. Warrington also has me. And there's a bit about Sonic the Hedgehog on the Game Boy Advance. Sega arrive on Game Boy Advance first picks, it declares. Page 20 for that. Remember all the excitement about Sonic coming to a Nintendo handheld for the first time? Madness. Oh, and Paper Mario is apparently Nintendo's latest epic reviewed inside. Plus they're giving away a free double game guide if you flip up the cover. Classic magazine cover design from back then, packed with info to try and grab your attention. This page is the welcome page to issue 53 of N64 Magazine, dated April 2001. It's boasting about being Britain's biggest and best-selling independent Nintendo mag, which was fair enough at the time. They're laying out their stall, saying they get proper news from Europe and America, not just nicking stuff off the internet, which was a dig at other mags maybe. They reckon they're independent and will review games properly, even imports. Down the side there's the usual staff list. Editor Andrea Ball, Deputy Editor Mark Green, all the usual suspects. Then there's some teasers for what's inside this issue. Looks like they've got a review of Paper Mario, calling it a gigantic new wafer-thin adventure. Remember that one? Turned out alright, didn't it? Then there's Welcome to Nintendo UK. Seems like they're getting questions answered by the folk at Nintendo's UK HQ in Chertsey. Good for the fans, that. Blimey, they've got 10 pages on Conker's Bad Fur Day and they're calling it X-rated action. That was a controversial one, wasn't it? A proper adult game on the N64. Quite something for Nintendo. There's something on Star Wars. Find out if Naboo is worth buying. Probably Star Wars. Battle for Naboo. It was alright. Nothing amazing. And Sin and Punishment, that was a Japanese import shooter, wasn't it? Bit niche for the mainstream, but good if you were into that sort of thing. Lastly, Sonic on GBA. A Sega game on a Nintendo console. They're making a big deal of that. It's Sonic the Hedgehog on the Game Boy Advance. Must have been a first look. Moi. And right at the bottom they're already plugging the next issue coming out on Tuesday the 10th of April. Saying it's going to be fantastic. You can jump to page 96 to find out more. Always got to keep you coming back for more, haven't they? Don't be fooled by feeble imitations, it says in big letters. They're really going for it this month. This page is the contents for issue 53 of the magazine, April 2001 issue. Kicking things off we have Planet 64 from page 8, that's the news section. Then we have the N64 arena for all the UK game reviews, starting on page 28. Looks like Conker's Bad Fur Day is getting a proper look in. They are calling it X-rated action. A bit much for a Nintendo mag, eh? That's on page 30. Star Wars Battle for Naboo is on page 40. That's Rogue Squadron 2, basically. There's a Scooby-Doo game feature as well. Classic Creep Capers. Page 45. They are making out it's like Resident Evil 2 but Hanna-Barbera style. Blimey. Import Arena is on page 46 for all the Japanese and American games. Paper Mario also starts on page 46. Must be a big feature to get that much space, or maybe not enough space. And then Mega Man 64 on page 50. Classic Capcom platforming on the N64. Regular sections at the back. Pages 96 and 98 for next month's preview and the reader letters. And down at the bottom, Planet Game Boy section with Sonic on the Game Boy Advance. Apparently Sega and Nintendo are working in harmony. Who'd have thought it? First details on page 19 for that. Looks like a packed issue. The next page of the magazine, page 5, is the contents page for issue number 5 of N64 Magazine from April 2001. It's got a future look section on page 6, teasing the big new N64 games, whatever they might be. There's a custom Robo V2 preview, saying it's Japanese blaster action. Find out how it plays, on page 6. Then there's Club 64 mailbox on page 54, where Greener, whoever that is, gives your letters the once-over. How to eliminate the hardcore in Sin and Punishment is on page 58, and Be Top Duck in Donald Duck is also mentioned, probably referring to Donald Duck, going Quackers. Tips Extra is on page 64, with top tips and action replay codes, which were always handy back then, weren't they? I'm the Best is on page 68, talking about scores on doors, whatever that means. Skill Club Millennium is on page 72, which is about the world's best gamers reside. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is on page 75, saying he won't give you the needle. Get it? which is a bit of a lame joke. The directory is on page 78, listing every N64 game reviewed and rated, always useful for seeing what was worth your money. And finally, subscriptions on page 94, offering to guarantee a copy of the magazine each month and save a packet of cash. The big features on the page are Conker's Bad Fur Day, which they're calling a massive 10-page review, promising swearing, sin and squirrels, and Paper Mario, which is described as back and he's flat, with a feature on Nintendo's latest adventure, both on pages 30 and 46 respectively. And lastly, Welcome to Nintendo UK on page 90, going behind the scenes at Nintendo's office and grilling everyone with pressing questions. Looks like a packed issue. This page is all about having a future look at upcoming N64 games, classic magazine title really. The main focus here seems to be this game called Custom Robo V2. Looking at the screenshots, it's a bit of a quirky one. You start in your bedroom apparently, which is a bit odd for a robot battling game, but there you go. They're calling the graphics nicely chunky, which is a polite way of saying they're a bit blocky, even for the N64, but in fairness, that's part of the charm of these games, isn't it? Apparently the Hollow Arena is where you can test your robot before proper battles. Sounds like a training mode to me. They mention the buildings hide extra kit, so looks like exploration and power-ups are involved. The lighting effects are described as primitive. Well, yeah, it's the N64, not exactly cutting-edge graphics we were talking about even back then, but they say it suits the game's style, which is fair enough. The info box tells us it's from Marigold, and it's a 128 megabits cart, standard stuff. It's 14 players, so multiplayer mayhem is possible. Controller and expansion packhooks aren't needed, which is good for keeping costs down, but it does use the rumble packhook for a bit of shaking action. No transfer packhook support though, whatever you'd even transfer in this sort of game. It's already out in Japan apparently, but TBA for the US and UK. Typical. They've given it a decent anticipation rating of 4 out of 5, so someone at the mag is clearly quite keen on it. Looks like it could be a fun little robot brawler, a bit different to what else was on offer at the time. This page is all about Custom Robo V2, another one of those Japanese games we were hearing about for the N64 back in the day. It's from the Future Look section, so it's previewing what's coming up. Looks like a robot battling game, and they're saying it's got a kind of RPG feel to it, wandering around towns and battling. They're really pushing the customization aspect, saying you can build up your robot with loads of different bits and bobs you collect. Visually, it's very much of its time, a bit blocky, but they're calling it gorgeous and anime-flavored, which is magazine speak for it is what it is on the N64. They mention battles are in 3D arenas, and there's interactive scenery like trains, which is a bit more interesting than just a flat square. It was an import job at this point, and they're even saying you'd need a passport converter to play it, which was the usual hassle if you wanted to play games that never made it out of Japan officially. They seem pretty keen on it though, and are promising a proper review next issue. So, another import to keep an eye on if you were into your robot games. This page from the mag is the news desk section, keeping us all in the loop with what's hot in the world of Nintendo. Top story is the Game Boy Advance, or GBA as it's being called, is coming to the US on the 11th of June. Blimey, that's a month earlier than we thought. Nintendo UK are apparently pulling out all the stops to try and get it out here around the same time, which would be smashing. They're saying the handheld will be out in violet, white and clear purple. Sounds a bit funky, and it's launching with at least 15 games, including Super Mario Advance and F-Zero Advance. Mario and F-Zero on the go? Can't complain about that, can you? Now there's a bit about Sega as well. Apparently they've decided to ditch the Dreamcast. Crikey, that was quick, wasn't it? They're still going to release a couple of Dreamcast games though, including the first Sonic the Hedgehog on a Nintendo machine, which is a bit of a laugh. Looks like they're pinning their hopes on third-party development now, with Bomberman Story and Pac-Man Advance mentioned. Seems like Nintendo of Canada started a marketing campaign calling the GameCube and GBA the real future of gaming. A bit bold, but you've got to admire the confidence. Nintendo UK are saying our GBA release date won't be before the 18th of May at the earliest. They went to E3 in Los Angeles, and all sorts of gossip is flying around. There's also a mention about GameCube being closer to launch, only a few months now they reckon. And apparently Squaresoft, who make Final Fantasy, are trying to patch things up with Nintendo after their falling out over Digicube. Interesting times. Natsume are doing Harvest Moon games for GameCube and GBA, and movie-licensed games are going to be big on both as well. So yeah, lots to look forward to, mostly handheld action by the looks of it. This page is from Planet 64 News Desk and has a few bits and bobs in it. First up, In Shortcuts, there's a piece about a report saying video games aren't the devil's work corrupting the youth, which was always a load of rubbish, wasn't it? Then there's something called Computer Love, about Nintendo teaming up with some website and a psychologist for a Valentine's Day competition. Sounds a bit soppy for gamers if you ask me. Moving on to the main article, Sega's plot thickens. It's about Sega making games for the GameCube. Seems they've been chatting with Nintendo for a while, and it's confirmed they've got dev kits for the Game Boy Advance. They're talking about a Sega Nintendo RPG with Sonic and Choo Choo Rocket characters, which is a bit of a weird combo if you think about it. They reckon it'll have characters from Mario, Yoshi, and Virtua Fighter 2, and it's meant to be out by Christmas. They also mention a game called Dream Comes True, which might be on the Dreamcast. It's all a bit of a mystery really, but Sega and Nintendo working together back then was a pretty big deal, considering they were rivals for so long. Below that, Yamauchi Speaks is about Nintendo's big boss, Hiroshi Yamauchi, talking about a new type of game that'll link the GameCube and Game Boy Advance, aiming for Christmas 2002. He's also saying they're gonna make sure they don't miss release dates in the future. Famous last words, eh? Dory. Finally, Score is about Twin Galaxies and their official video game and Pinball Book of World Records. They're looking for high score heroes and want people to submit their scores. They've got a massive 1,200-page book, with records from Pac-Man to Quake and everything in between, including N64 and Game Boy games. They're inviting gamers to nominate themselves and get in the book, so you can become a video game Hall of Famer apparently. Right then, time to dust off those old high scores perhaps. Lee. Oh, and in Creative Genius, Majora's Mask got an award for Best Adventure Game and Perfect Dark for Best Shoot 'em Up. Good choices I suppose, though Perfect Dark was a bit of a Half-Life wannabe if you ask me. This page showcases some news snippets and a feature about a Game Boy Color photo competition. At the top left there's a bit about Ham It Up. Apparently Japan's got a new hamster game called Hamster Monogatari for the Game Boy. They reckon hamster games sell well over there. Right then. Warringtonosa. Next up, GBA Dead. Seems there are rumors about a new handheld called Red Jade, funded by Ericsson, made by RJ Mikan, the bloke behind the Atari Lynx. They are saying it might have near N64 level graphics, which sounds a bit ambitious for a handheld, doesn't it? Below that, it sarcastically says GBA, doubtful in the extreme we reckon, about the graphics. Then, off the streets, over in America, in Illinois, a police officer is getting rid of violent video games by offering discounts and raffle tickets in exchange for them. He plans to destroy them, which is a bit drastic, isn't it? Bomber. The main article is Color Show, about the Game Boy Color Photography Awards. Last issue they mentioned the awards, and now the ceremony has happened in London at the Candid Arts Gallery in Islington. Apparently, it was all about showcasing photos from young photographers based around the theme of the colors of Game Boy. Nintendo is behind it all, of course, as a publicity stunt. The photos were grouped by color. They mention Helen Richards' footwear from a previous issue got a lot of attention at the event. The first prize of £2,500 went to Paul Abbott, who is from Falmouth College of Arts, for his photo of some feet and shoes classic. Second prize went to Falmouth's Thomas Butler, and a third prize of £1,500 went to a bloke in Lincoln. Daniel Moulding from De Montfort University got £1,000 for his photo of a train station waiting room. All 30 finalists got a copy of Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color, and a Game Boy Color itself as a prize. Can't complain about that, can you? This page delves into the world of Pokemon. Back in April 2001, the main headline screams postmodern pocket monsters and talks about the upcoming third Pokemon movie. Apparently the storyline is quite something, twisted even, comparing it to The Matrix, which was all the rage back then. It features a girl called May and something about Ash's mum. Bit dramatic for a kids film, eh? There's even a screenshot of Ash seemingly being attacked by fire. Blimey, could this be the end of young Ash? Let's hope not, eh? Then there's a piece called Burn, Poke Burn, which is a bit alarming. Apparently some priest in Mexico City has told kids to bring their Pokemon toys and magazines to church to be burned. Claims they contain subliminal messages that are turning kids evil and causing physical and mental damage. Honestly, some people just can't handle a bit of pocket monster fun, can they? They reckon it's a contradiction from the Vatican, who previously said Pokemon had no moral damage. Bit of a kerfuffle that. Lastly, they're discussing Crystal coming. Pokemon Crystal, which was initially a Japanese exclusive, might be making its way to the US and possibly even Europe. Good news for us Pokemon trainers. Apparently Nintendo has had a change of heart, likely due to compatibility issues with mobile phones or something. Still up in the air whether we'll get the mobile phone adapter over here though. They mention there are no new Pokemon in Crystal, but plenty of fresh battles, and one of the new villains is apparently quite dandy. Sounds promising for a bit more monster-catching fun on the Game Boy Color. This page is all about the latest Pokemon goodies hitting the shelves. First up, we've got a Pikachu money box, stuffed with chocolate balls. I mean, who wouldn't want another plastic Pikachu cluttering up the place, especially when it's full of sugary treats? Then there are Pokemon zipper pulls. Apparently you can stick these on anything from your school bag to your briefcase. The review reckons they're fun and exciting, which is, well, a bit much, isn't it? Next, in a truly bizarre turn, Pokemon vitamins. Pokemon suppositories, they joke, and blimey, you wouldn't put it past them back then to try and sell you anything Pokemon branded. They are described as tasting awful, which is hardly surprising. Moving on to the Pokemon trading card game, they're highlighting the Gym Challenge and Gym Heroes theme decks. These were pretty good for the time, actually. Gym Challenge featured the gym leaders like Giovanni, Sabrina, Koga and Blaine, each with their own deck. Gym Heroes was the opposing set with Misty, Brock, Lieutenant Surge and Erica. Good decks for beginners, apparently. Finally, there's a Pokemon Micro playset, a little plastic lunchbox affair, with a poker garden and a battle arena, plus some tiny plastic figures of Psyduck and Nidoran. Apparently, it's quite sweet and affordable, perfect for the younger Pokemon fans in your family. Jacked. And to finish it off, there's a little quiz question asking about dog-like Pokemon in the third Pokemon movie. The options are Wooper, Marill, and Entei. They're giving away a Pikachu zipper pull as a prize for the first correct answer pulled from Steve's sock. Charming. This page is a bit of an odd one, isn't it? It's an advert for the Royal Air Force, but it's trying to lure you in with the promise of getting paid to play. Turns out playing is basketball, not necessarily blasting aliens on your N64, although they do mention getting airborne in a fighter jet, so maybe they are trying to have it both ways. Yeah. It features a chap called Jerry Armstrong. Apparently he's a basketball player for the Oxford Devils, and also works for the RAF as a propulsion technician. Bit of a contrast there, eh? He's banging on about how good NBA courtside is on the N64. Says the graphics are cool, and it gets your heart racing, which, yeah, courtside was alright for its time. Pretty decent graphics for the N64, to be fair. They are pushing the RAF as a place that supports sports and fitness, and apparently they sponsor youth basketball leagues. They're trying to sell you the idea that you can join up, play sports, and have a career with over 70 different job types. Right then, if you were a young lad in 2001 who liked games and maybe sports, I suppose this might have caught your eye. Get paid to play. Sounds good on paper, doesn't it? Just maybe not exactly what you first think of when you see that headline. Still, RAF Final Four's basketball event, who knew? This page is about WCW Backstage Assault. Looks like it's hyped as a coming soon title in Planet N64 Magazine. It's got a Q&A section where they admit the graphics are a bit ropey, a bit off as they put it, but they're still impressed by the wrestling moves. They even joke about throwing a beefy bloke against a wall and trying not to giggle, which sounds like a typical Lads Mag comment of the time. They mention play modes including a Human Torch mode, which sounds a bit mental, and a Creator Wrestler feature, saying it's similar to the one in WCW Mayhem. Remember Mayhem? Yeah, it was alright. They're promising green-haired leotard blimps in the Creator Wrestler, so that paints a picture. There's an info burst table giving the game stats. 128 megcart size, 12 players, controller pack yes, and all the expansion and rumble packs are a no. Release date is listed as now for the US, but TBA for the UK and Japan, which isn't surprising. Often took ages for games to reach us. Anticipation rating is 3 out of 5 red dots, so not exactly setting the world on fire, but decent enough. The main article talks about WCW Backstage Assault as something to fill the gap after WWF No Mercy. They reckon wrestling fans are desperate for an up-to-date wrestler. Wrestler, classic magazine talk. It boasts over 50 wrestlers, 800 moves and 7 arenas, all backstage environments like gyms and toilets. Sounds like a right old brawl in the loose then. They mention you can throw opponents into walls, set them on fire with blazing planks and even use flying metal dustbins. Bit violent for WCW maybe? They even talk about gushing blood, and US censors being worried. They don't think it'll get a UK release, which is probably down to all the violence they're describing. Review is promised next month, so we'll see then if it's any good, if it even comes out here that is. They even take a jab at Conker's Bad Fur Day animation in comparison, saying this game is more suited to those tastes, which is a bit of a dig at Conker, or maybe a compliment to this wrestling game depending on how you look at it. There are also little comments next to screenshots like, yep, you can even rumble with the wrestler of your choice in the backstage bathroom, and freaks to rival Game Boy Gallery, courtesy of WCW's Creator Wrestler. Game Boy Gallery, blimey, that's a blast from the past. This page is all about Aiden Chronicles, THQ's new RPG for the N64. Seems like they're trying to squeeze every last drop out of the old 64-bit beast. They're saying it's from the folks behind the new Tetris, which warrants an interesting pedigree for an RPG, I suppose. It's been in development hell for ages apparently, but THQ is finally bringing it out, saying it's going to be a big rival to Final Fantasy and Zelda, which is a bold claim considering we've already had Ocarina of Time. They reckon it's a more traditional RPG, not like that Holy Magic Century. Shudder. Nobody liked that one. It stars a floppy-haired warrior in a big landscape, fighting ogres and harpies. Sounds very Dungeons & Dragons inspired, which is fair enough. Developers H2O are promising a deep story, a day and night system, and you can customize your party of wizards and warriors, all that jazz. There are some screenshots, they look alright, very N64-ish. One shows a big Minotaur-looking bloke, and another shows some dialogue boxes with character names like Kendall and Alaron. They mention you can run all the way to the horizon, which was always a big selling point back then, even if it was mostly fog. In the Q&A they confirm it's not for kids, aiming for a more mature audience, comparing it to Silicon Knights Eternal Darkness, which was a GameCube game, so they're clearly aiming high, or at least aiming for older teenagers. They talk about turn-based combat but with freedom of movement, which sounds a bit different. Apparently it's about 40 hours long, but choices you make will change the outcome, so replayability is there, they say. And they're already hinting at a sequel for the GameCube, Aiden Chronicles 2, ambitious gesture. The Infoburst bit confirms it's coming out in March 2001 in the US and UK, Japan is TBA. It's a 128 megabit cart, one player, and uses all the packs, controller, expansion and rumble, but no transfer pack. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5. So they're pretty confident about it. Looks like they are trying to position it as a serious RPG for the N64's last hurrah. We'll see if it lives up to the hype, eh? This page features a couple of games that were big in Japan, but one was a bit of a mystery to us in the UK at the time. First up, there's Animal Forest, which we now know as Animal Crossing. It's described as family communication business, which sounds a bit odd, but they explain it as a game where different family members can play at different times and then chat about their experiences in the game. Bit of a novelty back then, that kind of shared, persistent world idea. They mention you can do part-time jobs for animals like fishing and tree chopping, which sounds pretty tame compared to some of the action games we were used to on the N64. Apparently the game world changes with seasons in real time, which was quite a cool concept. It also looks like you needed to be able to read kanji to play it properly, which was a definite barrier for import gamers like myself at the time. Then there's Derby Stallion 64, a horse racing management sim. It's described as being for John McCricks of the world, which is a bit of a niche reference, but essentially it's for horse racing fans. They say it's been a long time coming, and it's unlikely to be released outside of Japan, which was often the case with these more specialist titles. It sounds like you train horses, race them, buy and sell them, the whole horse racing shebang. The reviewer seems to think the races themselves are the best bit. Looking back, neither of these games were exactly system sellers here in the UK, but they both had their own unique appeal, especially Animal Crossing, which eventually became massive. It's funny to think how obscure these games seemed in these magazine pages back in the day. This page is a preview of Polaris Snowcross for the N64. Looks like they are trying to mix wave race with 1080 snowboarding. Ambitious, I suppose. They mention there are 12 tracks, and the courses are quite vertical. Handling is a bit tricky apparently, like wave race jet skis. They say the courses are like Excitebike, with logs and chasms to avoid, and you can do some big jumps, so sounds like they are aiming for over-the-top arcade action. The graphics are Excitebike style stunts, simple but good looking. They mention 4 racers in a race. There's a Q&A section which says Polaris are the snowmobile people. They license their vehicles for the game, but oddly the game chooses your vehicle for each race. No multiplayer in this one, which is a bit of a letdown. They talk about weather effects, you can have blizzards. UK release is doubtful. Apparently the developer Vatical has cancelled US projects. Fingers crossed though. There's an info burst box that says it's from Vatical, 96 megabit cart size, supports controller pack and rumble pack, but not expansion or transfer pack. US releases now, UK and Japan are TBA. Anticipation rating is 3 out of 5 orange blobs. Then there's a Nintendo Net section, talking about the Game Boy Advance launch. Rayman Advance is mentioned with screenshots, they say it looks gorgeous. Then onto N64 news, mainly about Sin and Punishment, being meant for US and UK release, which is good news for us. But then there's news about Vatical again, this time their Sea-Doo Hydrocross and Carnival games are cancelled, oh dear. And blimey, they are talking about the GameCube Metroid game, being a first-person shooter. Apparently Nintendo weren't happy with the third-person style, and told Retro Studios to change it to Perfect Dark style. turning Samus into a ball in first person? Sounds a bit odd to me. They mention GameCube games, Football 2002, and Thunder Rally have been cancelled, and Metroid won't be out soon. November 2001 US release for GameCube is mentioned from the New York Toy Fair. Have a good month from Jess Bickham, the editor. April 2001 on the bottom, so all very current news. The next page is all about the Game Boy. It's the Planet Game Boy section of the magazine. Slap bang in the middle is Pocket Soccer. Blimey, just how beautiful a game is it, eh? They're really pushing the boat out with the visuals, apparently. Above that, there's a little box saying, reviewed this issue, and it mentions Little Mermaid Pinball on page 29, asking if it will sink or swim. Cheeky. Then there's Road Champs on page 30, Activision's BMX sim, they are asking champ or chump. Kurusur. Sounds like they're not convinced yet. Oh, and there's a Sonic the Hedgehog character in a red circle shouting, First Pigs, and Sonic on GBA. Right, pigs, maybe a typo for pics? Who knows with these magazines sometimes. Down at the bottom it says, Plus, with a list of other reviews including Player Manager 2001, Alice in Wonderland, Aliens and Game Boy Gallery. And some game called Back Once Again with the Ill Behavior. Sounds a bit dodgy, that one. Looks like issue 28. April 2001, so plenty of Game Boy bits and bobs to get your teeth into this month. This page is all about the handhelds, isn't it? Specifically the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color. Looks like Sega are jumping into bed with Nintendo, which is a bit of a shocker after all the console wars back in the day. They're making a Sonic game for the Game Boy Advance, called Sonic Advance, and they're going back to the Mega Drive style gameplay, which is fair enough because everyone loved those games. They reckon it'll be better than the Mega Drive and Neo Geo Pocket Sonic games, which is a bold claim. Apparently it'll have 4-player battles, and might even link up with a future GameCube Sonic game. Sounds alright actually. If they can recapture the speed and fun of the originals on a handheld, that would be something. Then there's news about the new Zelda games for the Game Boy Color. They finally got proper names now, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. One's about time travel puzzles, and the other is about swapping seasons, which sounds a bit different for a Zelda game but could be interesting. They're saying the Japanese version is already out, and the UK one will be along soon. They even had animatronic Zelda adverts on telly in Japan, which sounds a bit mad. It's all pretty standard handheld news really, but the Sega and Nintendo thing is still a bit weird to get your head around after all this time, isn't it? Martin Kitts is the editor, and some of the contributors are Mark Green, Andrea Ball, Geraint Evans, Alan Madrell, Paul Edwards and Simon Middleweek, just in case you were wondering who put this together. This page is all about the Game Boy Advance, which was a pretty hot topic back then. First up, we've got Choo Choo Rocket Advance. They're saying even though Sega's first GBA game Sonic Advance might make waves, Dreamcast owners know about the real addictive nature of Choo Choo Rocket. It's that puzzle game with mice and cats, and you have to guide the mice into rockets. Apparently this GBA version has loads of levels, including some created by Dreamcast players, plus a level editor. Sounds like a good handheld version of a decent Dreamcast puzzler, frantic multiplayer fun they reckon. Ooh. Then there's Game Boy Wars Advance. Seems like strategy games were getting a bit of love on the GBA. They mentioned Napoleon and Tactics Ogre, so some serious strategy titles. Game Boy Wars is a remake of a series from Japan. Turn-based, not direct control like Warlocked. They're saying it's got a humorless, super deformed anime style, a bit like Metal Slug. Sounds alright for strategy on the go if you are into that sort of thing. They mention it has gameplay depth, which is good for a handheld. Boris. Finally, Advanced GTA. Car games on Game Boy weren't always amazing. They mention Driver as one of the few good ones. This Advanced GTA is supposed to be a big deal for the GBA. They're banging on about sprite scaling to give a pseudo 3D road effect. They compare it to F-Zero and Mario Kart, which are pretty high standards for a handheld racer back then. Loads of cars and tracks, 48 cars and 32 courses they're claiming. They even mention Ridge Racer as a comparison point, saying it shows that Namco's rumored Ridge Racer is a possibility. So it sounds like they're quite impressed with this Advanced GTA, reckon it's fast, and has power slides. Looks promising for a handheld racer, especially if you like tuning cars. That's featured here too. This page is a review of Pocket Soccer on the Game Boy. Right then, Pocket Soccer, eh? They're saying here that historically handheld consoles haven't been great for sports games, which is a bit harsh. I mean, we had some crackers back in the day, didn't we? But fair enough, maybe not on the footy front. Anyway, this Pocket Soccer is supposed to be from some little UK developers called Gameplay Studios. They reckon it's got this real arcade feel to it, like Kick-Off 2 apparently. They're banging on about the different pitches you can play, on clay, tarmac, sand, walled yards, all sorts. Sounds a bit bonkers if you ask me, but I suppose that's the idea. They are saying that you'll need to master bouncing the ball off walls and swerving it around like some sort of pinball game. Pinball soccer? Interesting take, Hasbro. Apparently, the game avoids the usual pitfalls of footy games, whatever that means. Controls are simple: pass, shoot, tackle. They mention power-ups and forward passes, and how you can get power to dribble past anyone. Sounds a bit over the top, doesn't it? But they're giving it 4 stars overall, so they must think it's alright. Well worth a look. This is an excellent title, they're saying in their buying guide bit at the top. Not bad for a first go from Gameplay Studios then. It's definitely got that old school look to it from the screenshots. Very retro arcade vibe, probably something to keep you amused on the bus, I reckon. This page features a couple of reviews for the Game Boy. First up we have Player Manager 2001. Right, so this is trying to muscle in on the territory of O'Leary Manager 2000, which was already out and about. Apparently this one doesn't quite hit the mark. They reckon it's a bit poor compared to O'Leary's effort. They're having a laugh at the made-up player names, like Barry Chubbs, saying there are no real players at all, just a bunch of unknowns. But it does have the usual management stuff, like training and transfers and all that guff. They've slapped a 3 out of 5 on it, so sounds like one to avoid unless you're desperate for a football management game on the go. Then there's The Little Mermaid 2, Pinball Frenzy. This one sounds a bit more cheerful. They reckon it's decent enough pinball on the Game Boy Color, comparing it to Pokemon Pinball and Kirby's Pinball Land. Says it's got a good feel to it, even if it's a bit slow, and there are a couple of tables based on Ariel and Melody, plus mini-games and all sorts. Apparently, it's tough to get a high score but keeps you trying, and you can even print your scores if you had the Game Boy printer, remember those? They gave this one a 4 out of 5, so seems like a better bet than the Footy Manager, if you fancy some pinball on your handheld. This page has a couple of Game Boy reviews, kicking off with Alice in Wonderland. Right then, another Disney license cash-in, as if we needed more of those. Apparently it's a basic platformer, gets a bit frustrating but it's not the worst thing ever, I suppose. They even bring up Disney's Magical Racing Tour as a comparison, which is never a good sign, is it? Standard stuff, collecting stars and keys, and Alice can shrink or grow with mushrooms. Sounds a bit predictable, doesn't it? They mention white rabbits and frogs too. Must be ticking off the checklist of Alice in Wonderland clichés. They reckon it's tricky for the younger audience it's aimed at and moan about a Where in Wonderland subgame. But it does have an art gallery, where you can print your own scenes with a Game Boy printer, fancy that? Overall it gets a 3 out of 5. Can't say I'm rushing out to get it. PK. Warrington Norley. Next up is Road Champs BXS Stunt Biking. This one's trying to be the Dave Mirra of Game Boy, it seems. Trick busting and all that, got an impressive move list apparently. You can do loads of tricks by messing with your speed and the buttons, so that's something. They say it's got precise controls and is a bit of a brain workout. Tricky but not controllers mashingly hard apparently. It's mainly solo runs, competing against yourself. They reckon it's a solid put together game and gives you a bit of reward for sticking with it and learning the tricks. Gets a 4 out of 5, so a bit better than Alice then. Looking at the screenshots, it's your typical side-in BMX game, jumps, ramps, that sort of thing. Probably alright if you were into that sort of thing on the go. This page features a review for Aliens Thanatos Encounter on the Game Boy. It's from THQ and was priced at £25 back then, with a password link-up feature, no color, and was slated for release around March 23rd. The review kicks off by mentioning James Cameron's Aliens films and how they've spawned a few games. This one is a Game Boy title by Crayfish, and the reviewer seems to have had some initial hope given the source material. Thanatos apparently means death in ancient Greek, which is a bit of trivia for you. Gameplay-wise, it's a top-down shooter where you investigate aliens. You can equip items in both hands, like a motion tracker and a pulse rifle, which is handy. The motion tracker is mentioned quite a bit, as you'd expect for an aliens game. However, it sounds like the game is a bit of a letdown. The motion tracker apparently doesn't work too well, and the controls are rubbish, with different modes like strafe, free and lock that don't really improve things. The enemies are fast and unpredictable, and they regenerate, making it properly difficult in a bad way. Apparently the AI is also poor, with aliens just bumping into walls. They reckon the game had potential but is ultimately ruined by these problems, giving it a measly 2 out of 5 stars. There are screenshots showing the top-down view, the inventory screen with a pulse rifle and motion tracker, and a character select screen, highlighting a chap called Cadet Jarrell, who they joke would be alien fodder in the films. Overall, it's not a glowing review, more of a could have been better type of thing, which was a shame for Aliens fans on the Game Boy at the time. This page is showcasing the Game Boy camera, that mad little add-on for the Game Boy that everyone went nuts for back in the day. It's the Game Boy Gallery section, and it's full of reader-submitted photos, Proper blurry and lowers like you'd expect, but that was the charm, wasn't it? They've got a winner this month, some disturbing baby picture. Yeah, Game Boy camera loved a creepy photo. Then there's a bloke who reckons he's a lonesome guitar man, looks like a guitar made of face, mind you. Another fella is apparently a gothic nightmare, and another one is just some geezer called Jez with a slaphead, fair enough. There are a couple of upside down photos, which, classic Game Boy camera fun. Someone's taken Tom York lyrics to heart, apparently, with a very abstract blobby picture. Someone else is warning about suntan lotion for babies. Sounds sensible. And there's a picture that's supposed to look like the magazine's own front cover from a previous issue. A bit meta that. Warrington. They've got a section called Send Us Your Freaks, inviting more of these charming snaps. They're giving away an action pack, courtesy of Joytech, which is a decent little hall mains adapter, rechargeable battery, carry case, the lot. You had to send your pics to Planet Game Boy at the N64 Magazine offices if you wanted to get featured. Good times. It's a monthly feature, only within the pages of N64 Magazine, just in case you missed the massive N64 logo at the bottom. All in all, just a bit of fun showing off what you could do with that weird and wonderful Game Boy camera. This page is a belter right then. It's all about the latest N64 games reviewed in issue 53 of N64 Magazine. Read he. First up, it's Conker's Bad Fur Day. Cheeky squirrel indeed. Everyone was wondering if this Conker game would actually be any good, especially with all the adult humor they were hinting at. Looks like the Grim Reaper is involved, probably up to no good with Conker as usual. Then we've got Star Wars, Battle for Naboo, with a delightful quote from Jar Jar Binks himself, "Messa wantin' flying and shooting." Yeah, everyone was desperate for more Star Wars at this point, even if it meant Jar Jar. Caca. Next is Scooby-Doo, classic creep capers. Should we let this sleeping dog lie? Sounds like classic Scooby-Doo monster hunting, probably more aimed at the younger gamers, but still, Scooby is Scooby. Don't forget to visit the import arena, it shouts. Yeah, always tempting to see what goodies were coming over from America and Japan that we weren't getting over here, or were getting later. Paper Mario is there, with Mario pointing and looking chuffed. Apparently the English language version is just beautiful. Well, it did look rather nice in that papercraft style, didn't it, warn you? Finally, Mega Man 64. It's been a long time coming, that's for sure. Everyone was waiting for Mega Man to make the jump to 3D on the N64, and they're asking if Old Blue Eyes is back. Guess we'll have to see about that one. All in all, looks like a packed issue, something for everyone. Turn to page 30 for Conker, page 40 for Star Wars, 45 for Scooby-Doo, 46 for Paper Mario, and page 50 for Mega Man 64. Right then, let's get on with it. This page is showing you how N64 Magazine dishes out its reviews. A bit of a behind-the-scenes look, you might say. It's got sections titled Essential Information and If You're in a Hurry, which is pretty much telling you they know you haven't got all day to read about games. There's an info burst box, and for some reason they've put Metroid 64 inches at the top, which is a bit of a laugh really, because there was no Metroid 64 game on the N64, more like wishful thinking there. It lists all the techie details like cartridge size, player numbers, and whether it uses a controller pack, expansion pack, and all that jazz. Looks like this fake Metroid 64 is down for controller pack saves, but no cartridge or password saves, which was pretty standard back then. It's marked for release in April in the US, May in the UK, and November in Japan, and they reckon it'll cost £40. Then there's a bit about N64 Passport compatible, which was handy if you were importing games and needed one of those converter cartridges to play them on your UK machine. Over on the right, they've got the breakdown of their scoring. Pluses and minuses picks out the good and bad points, like amazing levels and appalling music. Then, if you like this section is suggesting similar games, and they've jokingly put Mickey Mouse 64 inches from Rare, giving it a crazy 96% score, and calling it a Mario beating Mickey Mouseathon. Bit cheeky that. The proper review categories are visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. This Metroid 64 feat is getting 9 for visuals, 8 for sounds and mastery, 7 for lifespan, and a massive 90% overall verdict. Looks like they were really rating it, even if it was a fantasy game. Gaga. Then they explain the scoring system. Anything 85% and above gets a star game badge. 8,470% is fantastic. 6,950% is perfectly playable but not special. 4,920% is lazily cobbled together, and 190% is the disaster zone. Sounds about right, pretty standard magazine review stuff. Down at the bottom, Team 64 on holes. It's got pictures of the N64 Magazine team and their Game of the Month choices. Andrea Ball liked Decorating 64, Judd Webb and Paul Edwards both went for Battle for Naboo, Mark Green and Alan Madrell both chose Paper Mario, and Dark Mark and Steve Jaleem picked Conker's Bad Fur Day. Bit of a mixed bag of games there, and a bit of in-house humor with titles like Decorating 64 Feet, page 29, April 2001, Another Month, Another N64 Mag. This page has a full spread dedicated to Conker's Bad Fur Day. Right there in big letters, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and it's subtitled, Refreshes the Parts Other Squirrels Cannot Reach, which is a bit cheeky, even for them. They're calling it an info burst and giving it a big A rating, so they clearly think it's the bee's knees. Looking at the details, it's from THQ, a hefty 512 megabit cartridge. Those were the days, eh? 1 to 4 players, which is interesting, and it uses the rumble park but nothing else. No controller park, no expansion park, no transfer park, all marked with big red crosses. Password save, cartridge save, also no-go. Release dates are now for the US, April 13th for us here in the UK, and TBA for Japan. 50 quid it would have set you back. Blimey. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One with Conker being chased by bees. Caption says, tickling bees come in handy. And to swim like the wind, sounds like a frantic bit of gameplay. Another shows some cartoonish violence, blood splatters and all, saying, rare aren't shy when it comes to cartoon gore. And a final one with those blocky grunt soldier things, saying they'll worship the ground you walk on later, so typical game enemy stuff. The text talks about Rare's reputation, and how they're known for quality. It mentions the 4-letter word controversy, and how the game's got bums, chortle, farts, snigger, and rude words, chuckle. But they're trying to get past all that, and focus on the actual game. They even sarcastically suggest getting a cool glass of milk and some air biscuits to settle down with, before diving into the impure, adulterated madness. Sounds like they're really hyping up the adult humor and gameplay. Yeah, Conker was definitely something different for the N64, wasn't it? Bit of a shock to the system at the time, but in a good way. This page is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day. In it, seems like they're focusing on the rudeness factor, calling it the rudest game ever, on the N64, and an 18-rated title, which, back then, was a big deal for Nintendo. They're asking if it's nasty, funny, or just childish, and letting you decide. There's a bunch of little boxes showing off the, shall we say, more mature aspects. Gore has Conker feeding a mouse cheese until it explodes. Pretty gruesome stuff for a squirrel game, you have to admit. Wee shows little fellas on fire, needing to be put out with amber nectar. Cheeky. Pooh has the great mighty Pooh, singing away. What a character that was. Bums shows Conker taking a bite out of a caveman's. Well, you get the picture, using a dino. Booze shows Conker looking a bit worse for wear after a drink, and fart is self-explanatory really, bottom burps and all that. They've got a section called Conker the Sensitive, which is a bit ironic given the game, but it's about how he's sensitive to the environment. Apparently, pressing A and B in certain spots lets you do unique tasks, using items and the environment together. A bit of puzzle solving then, not just toilet humor. Down at the bottom there's a bit on a caveman level, mentioning embarrassing secrets and aiming for their heads. Standard stuff really, hit 'em in the weak spot. And there's mention of a green button and a light bulb puzzle. Classic game mechanics to get you thinking a bit, even amidst all the filth. Overall it's playing up the shock value of Conker, which was definitely its selling point. It was pushing the boundaries for an N64 game, that's for sure. Made a bit of a splash at the time, did Conker, for better or worse depending on your taste. This page is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day, and they're really pushing the boat out, praising it. They're calling it Stunning Squirrel, and banging on about the technical feats Rare have achieved, like the speech which is full voice acting throughout, not just grunts and noises. They mentioned the lip cinching, which was pretty impressive back then, to be fair. There's sections highlighting the levels, saying each location has solidity and perfection, which is a bit strong, but they were known for detailed levels at Rare. Cutscenes are mentioned as excellent set pieces, with Disney-quality animation, and the lighting is supposedly unmatched on the N64. Bit over the top, but it was a looker. Hehehe. Then there's a bit called, My Haven't You Grown?, which is comparing it to 12 Tales, saying remember when things were all flowers and cute? Well now it's mountains of poo and trash-talking animals. They're basically pointing out how much cruder Conker is, which was the whole point, wasn't it? They even include little captions like, "Oh nasty, just look at all that happy cuteness, it makes us sick," and, "That's better, a giant dung heap with angry bugs." Subtle as a brick, these guys. Ooh, 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 ooh. Finally, there's a creature feature bit, introducing some of the characters. Conker himself, obviously, described as a bit of a wrong'un, and then Berry, his love interest, apparently resembling a Cadbury's bunny. And lastly, Teaser, Baza and Noza. These scarab beetles, they say, are like Liverpudlian scabs, and you have to kick the life out of them. Charming stuff. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was a bit of a surprise release for the N64 back then, wasn't it? Sure. First up, we've got a section called Weird But Wonderful, which is bang on the money, because Conker is certainly that. They're highlighting the Great Mighty Pooh encounter, and rightly so. It's one of those moments, you know? Properly bizarre, operatic Pooh monster, definitely made you gasp in amazement back in the day. Poor. Then there's Groovy Movies, talking about the film parodies in Conker. They mention the Saving Private Ryan beach landing scene, which is pretty iconic, and the Godzilla and Matrix spoofs. They point out the John Woo-style slow-mo and bullet trails in the Matrix bit. Good stuff. Conker was really clever with all those film references. Cash for Critters section is about the in-game money, the bucks, and how you can bribe characters to get further in the game. It's a clever system, getting you to explore and collect. Hey yo. Then we get character spotlights. First is Greg, described as an incompetent Deathbringer who hates squirrels and cats. He's after extra lives, sounds about right for a Grim Reaper type character in Conker. Next is the Panther King. Undisputed Big Daddy of Woodland, they call him. He's got it in for squirrels and wants to send them to the dark place. He's a right villain, that one. Finally, there's the Evil Teddies. They're described as fluffy little fellas with attitude, back for revenge after being slaughtered in the Milk War. Teddies are the main enemies, these psychotic teddy bears, proper mentalists. Overall, it's a good overview of some of the standout quirky bits from Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was definitely pushing the boundaries of what you expected on the N64. Certainly wasn't your average family-friendly platformer, was it? This page is a look at The Bad Fur Day Begins from Conker's Bad Fur Day. It seems to be a guide to the early stages of the game, breaking it down into 8 sections. Starting with Honey Rescue, where you're sorting out some wasps for Mrs. Queen Bee. Then it's on to Beetle Splat, which sounds pretty self-explanatory. Using a slingshot, Birdie gives you to take out some dung beetles. Next up is Mouse Feed, where you need to get rid of a belching mouse with some cheese to get into a barn. And Fork Attack, which is about dealing with a fork character by leading him into hay bales and stomping on his eyeballs. Charming stuff. Frankly Stupid is about a tool called Frankie, who needs saving from the rafters, because he's a bit daft apparently. Then there's Bat Burning, where you're in the barn loft with a blowtorch, dealing with bats and cutting down Frankie the Fork. Hey Ho involves using Frankie to get rid of a big bale of hay. Sounds like some platforming stuff. And finally, Robot Wars, where you're fighting a robot beneath the barn, needing to find a way to shut it down. The page seems to be from N64 Magazine, issue 53. Looks like a handy walkthrough for those first bits of Conker if you were stuck back then. This page is diving into Conker's Bad Fur Day, isn't it? Cheeky squirrel causing mayhem as usual. The headline is If Your Name's Not Down, which is pretty apt for Conker, and it's all about getting into this club in the game. Tip number 1, you're climbing a stone tower, dodging some angry dinos, and then you gotta turn into an Anvil Classic to smash a statue. Then, bash a statue in tip 2, to crush some poor cavemen down below. Serves them right probably. Tip 3, the bouncer's a bit of a stickler for dress codes, trainers are a no-go, typical. Number 4, you're luring a baby dino, bit cruel if you ask me, to a sacrificial altar to find a back door. Tip 5, a stone dragon lets you in. Bribed with some natty threads, fancy that. And tip 6, after some gentle persuasion, you're in, needing lager, a workman's jacket, and some white gloves. Rave on. There's a bit called The Spice of Life, bigging up Conker's varied gameplay. They say there's never a dull moment, keeping you on your toes and all that. Then there's Ride M Cowboy, with tips on using bulls, dinosaurs and crates to get around. Typical platforming, Conker style. April 2001, page 35 of the magazine. This page in N64 Magazine is diving deep into Conker's Bad Fur Day, which, let's be honest, was a bit of a Marmite game back then, wasn't it? Some people loved the adult humor, others were a bit shocked by it on their Nintendo 64. They've broken it down into sections from the game, starting with Sunny Funny, which they call plain juvenile, but admit you've got to love it. It's that part where you're helping the sunflower get it on with the bees, which is, yeah, pretty crude but also quite funny, in a childish way. Apparently it turns into a trampoline too, typical Rare, eh? Pruh. Then there's Count Bachula, the vampire bit. They're raving about this, saying it's one of the best sub-games on the N64, ever. You turn into a bat, get claws, and a shotgun to blow zombie heads off, Resident Evil style. They mention the sound effects being properly sinister with babies crying and kids laughing, which is a bit twisted, even for Conker. They reckon the scenery is top-notch too, can't argue with that. Rare always knew how to make a game look good. Next up is It's War, and this is the Saving Private Ryan spoof section, against the teddies, those evil teddy bears. You're Conker in a tank, blasting away, dodging bombs, all that jazz. They make a point about the sound effects being amazing, and say you should grab some headphones to really experience it. Warrior. Finally, they've got a bit called Squirrel Gibbles, where they're talking about the game's flaws. They reckon the camera system is awful and the controls can be a pain, leading to unfair health loss and frustrating jumps. They admit you might expect these issues from a less experienced developer, but from Rare, it's a bit disappointing. However, they still say the game as a whole is brilliant, so it sounds like they're willing to overlook the problems because the rest is just so good. They've got some screenshots dotted around showing off the different areas and action, like Conker getting splattered by something nasty, and him looking less than impressed with his host at dinner, and a big fella with a frying pan. Yeah, typical Conker really, isn't it? This page talks about the multiplayer modes in Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was a bit of a surprise package on the N64 back then, wasn't it? They called it N64 Arena, Conker's Bad Fur Day. First up it mentions, Enter the Vertex, which is about a bank robbery scenario. Apparently, Conker gets asked by a weasel boss to rob a bank. They are really pushing the Matrix angle here, talking about slow motion and dodging bullets, which was all the rage back then thanks to that film. Seems like you have to stuff your pockets with cash, and then meet up with the Panther King. Then it goes into And There's More, and this bit is about the actual multiplayer modes. They call it customary for Rare games to have good multiplayer longevity boosters, which is fair enough. Rare did know their stuff when it came to multiplayer, didn't they? Ooh. There's a section on Raptor, where you can play as either raptors or cavemen. Raptors have speed and claws, while cavemen use primitive weapons. It's all about prehistoric carnage and protecting nests. Sounds a bit chaotic, in a good way. Next is Beach, which is teams of French teddies attacking the beach while other teddies defend. They mention screaming gunfire and exploding rockets. Sheer class. The baseball bat is mentioned as an effective weapon. War is described as capture the flag, infiltrating the enemy's camp, stealing their flag, and getting back to base. They warn to watch out for snipers. Races on hoverbikes with speed boosts, missiles and obstacles on the track. They reckon Rare has plenty of experience in designing this kind of thing and that it's great fun, plain and simple. Yeah, Rare were always good at the arcade-style races. Booting. Heist is about controlling multicolored weasels armed with baseball bats and crossbows, looking for bags of loot. You have to get the loot back to base without getting your teeth smashed in. Gear. Finally, Tank is about meaty tanks and lob artillery at your opponents, trying to be first to the explosive nuclear object in the center. The main turret can be revolved independently. Sounds like proper carnage, that does. There's also a little section called Cog Kappa, talking about meeting the Cog Carl/Quentin, who has a split personality and is grumpy and sexist on one side, and camp on the other. They argue about who gets to be at the top and deliver rude dialogue. Sounds like typical Conker humor, really. This page titled, Wanted Hardcore Gamer, is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day, and it's definitely not pulling any punches about how tough it is, mind you. It highlights some particularly nasty bits, calling them unfairly difficult, or just plain rock hard. First up, there's 12 Tails, which they reckon is one of the most irritating things in Conker, this infinite lives lark, and then you get sent back to the start if you lose them all. Bit pointless, isn't it? They then moan about a swimming section with spinning blades, saying it's hair loss frustrating and that salty tears are coming. Sounds about right, those bits were proper cheap. Next, the submarine shooting bit. Devilish they call it, and they aren't wrong. Shooting subs while they're bombing you, and then bam, rocket up your backside. Charming. Then there's a nightmare tunnel with lasers and explosives, classic Rare trap-filled tunnel, and gun-tutting teddies chasing you. Lovely. Finally, a platform where you have to run like mad to get prune juice laxative for cows. Conker, eh? Always something utterly bizarre. There's a bit about lifespan saying despite all the failures you'll keep playing, which is true. It was that sort of game. Gameplay is simple, guiding Conker about, doing errands for characters, solving puzzles, that sort of thing. They reckon it's pitched at the hardcore level, could drive you insane, and they really lay into the camera, saying it's utterly lamentable, worse than Banjo-Kazooie's niggly camera. Bit harsh, but it could be a pain at times. Finally, there's a funny little bit of advice with Conker and some dodgy looking characters, saying never turn your back on a Gurner in Sunnies. Wise words indeed. This is all part of the N64 Arena section from issue 53. The next page is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day. It's got a big headline, Show EMWHU's Boss, focusing on the boss battles, which, to be fair, were pretty memorable. They're calling each boss encounter a genuine surprise and really tricky. They even mention a giant boiler and a girly bunny hand puppet attached to a giant blind mechanical teddy bear. Sounds about right for Conker, didn't it? They also say the final boss is the legendary Panther King. Blimey, that's a bit of a spoiler, but back then we were probably used to that kind of thing. Roll. They've got a pluses and minuses section. The pluses are the visuals, humor, how compelling it is, the multiplayer and the atmosphere. Can't argue with any of that really. The game looked amazing for the time, it was definitely funny, and the multiplayer was a laugh. But then the minuses. Worst camera ever. Spot on. That camera was a nightmare, wasn't it? Ridiculously frustrating, unforgiving and unfair. Yeah, it could be a bit of a pain in the backside at times. And, your mum won't buy it for you? Well, they knew their audience, didn't they? Pouring to none, sir. They're comparing it to Banjo-Kazooie, saying, if you like this, Banjo-Kazooie, which is fair enough, both rare games, but Conker was definitely a bit more, adult, shall we say. Visually they've given it a 10 out of 10, sounds 9, mastery 8, lifespan 7. Overall they've slapped an 89% on it. The verdict is, despite the constant frustration, you just can't help but love Conker's Bad Fur Day. Pretty much sums it up, really. Loved it, even when it was making you want to chuck your controller at the telly because of that bloody camera. Still, a classic N64 title, no doubt. This page is from N64 Magazine, and it's all about Star Wars, Battle for Naboo. Right, another Episode 1 game, the second one actually, following on from Pod Racer. THQ are publishing this one, on a 128 megabit cartridge. Single player only, uses the controller pack and rumble pack, and good old cartridge save. Apparently it's already out in the States, but we're looking at March 30th here in the UK, for 40 quid. They are talking about Naboo, Queen Amidala, and some new faces. They're drawing comparisons to Shadows of the Empire, Rogue Squadron and Episode 1, Pod Racer, which were all decent enough. We've got some screenshots showing off speeder sections, space combat, and ground-based action. Apparently the N1 Starfighter is top-notch, like the X-Wing, and the low-orbit fights look good but are a handful to control. They also say the speeder feels fast, and you'll see plenty of hut vessels. Level completion advice includes taking out satellites, and if lasers fail, photon torpedoes are your friend. This page is all about Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo, on the N64. It's a Know Your Enemy feature, prepping you for what you'll be facing from the Trade Federation. First up, we've got the bog-standard battle droids, the usual cannon fodder in Episode 1, and apparently irritatingly so in this game too. They're saying they're tricky to hit, which, well, maybe if you're a rubbish shot. Then there's the droidekas, nastier versions they reckon, with shields and twin blasters. Droid fighters are next, described as strange as they sometimes just fall out of the sky, attacking in numbers and with powerful weaponry. Then we're on to AATs, the tanks, slow and well-armored apparently, so you need to get behind them to avoid a blasting. Pirates are mentioned, nasty opportunists looking to profit from the Trade Federation occupation, nothing surprising there. Finally, low-orbit outposts, tricky things armed to the teeth with mines and turrets, so watch your handling in space. There's a bit about multiplayer, or the lack of it, more like multiplayer dismay they've called it. Factor 5 decided against it, which they reckon is a gut-wrenching omission if you were hoping for some Star Wars multiplayer on the N64. They seem a bit miffed about that, and say it looks like Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as we call it, will rule the roost for multiplayer right to the end of the N64's life. Oh well, they sigh. Boss, down at the bottom it's, Naboo, you'll have to save the planet. They mention the Naboo bomber as graceful but painfully slow, and then Borvo the Hutt. Seems he's a pain in the backside, and you can't wipe him out at the start, shame. They're saying this puny little bomber is scrap metal after only a few hits, and mentioning claustrophobic streets of Theed making for frenzied blasting. Looks like your standard fare space shooter tie-in, you know the sort. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo. It's all about a mission called Mission of Mercy, which is set in Liberation of Camp 4. Apparently you are jumping into the N1 Starfighter to free some folks from the Trade Federation on Naboo. They've broken the mission down into 6 steps. First off, you're defending farms from Trade Federation fighters, classic Star Wars stuff. Next, it's hangar turrets that need seeing to. Then it gets a bit different, you're pinching a STAP, one of those single trooper aerial platforms, and following a prison convoy, bit sneaky that. After that, you're tasked with blowing up a shield generator to free prisoners. Then, things heat up even more, as you've got to locate the Gian speeder, which they are clearly hyping up as the weapon of choice for this level. Finally, it's taking out tanks and shields to free Nabooian slaves. Sounds like a busy mission, alright, lots to be getting on with. Powell. There's also a bit on the side with gameplay tips like being careful on the streets and highlighting the giant speeder's effectiveness. They mention sticking with your wingman for one tricky mission, and that the giant speeder will cause the Trade Federation some grief, no doubt. Over on the right, there's a review section, starting off quite positive, praising the music and menus and all that presentational stuff, saying it's promising and very Star Wars flavored, but then they get down to brass tacks, saying when you actually start playing there are some fundamental gameplay flaws. They're not totally slating it, but they point out that compared to Rogue Squadron, which this was supposed to be improving on, Battle for Naboo has problems. Apparently the vehicles and enemies are sparse and spindly, battle droids are tiny and poorly defined, which makes aiming a chore, especially if you've got an older telly. They reckon it becomes a real chore pretty quickly. Seems like Naboo might not be quite the galactic holiday destination they promised. They even go on about poor handling and awkward flight dynamics, and that space missions become more about patience than skill. Ouch. So it starts off well, but then apparently it takes a bit of a nosedive in the gameplay department. A bit of a mixed bag then, it seems. This page is all about Star Wars, Battle for Naboo on the N64. It's got a big headline boasting 2 million light years to the gallon, which is a bit of a silly play on words considering it's spaceships and all. They're showcasing the different vehicles you can pilot, like the Heavy Stap, Naboo Starfighter, Giant Speeder, Federation Gunboat, Naboo Bomber, and Police Cruiser. Each one gets a little write-up explaining its strengths and weaknesses, which is handy to know. There's a pluses and minuses box breaking down what's good and bad. Good points are awesome sound, huge landscapes, varied missions, and the fact it's Star Wars obviously. The downsides are poor flight dynamics, sparse places, and it's frequently frustrating, which doesn't sound ideal. They reckon the space battles are disappointing too. If you like this, they suggest Rogue Squadron on the N64, which is a classic. In it, they gave Rogue Squadron a score of 85% back in the day, so it's a good benchmark. Then they've got these sections with little icons and scores. Visuals gets an 8, sounds a 10, that's high praise for the audio, mastery a 7, and lifespan an 8. They reckon the graphics are impressive for the N64, and the sound is top-notch as you'd expect from Factor 5, who did Rogue Squadron as well. They mention full speech and great music, which was a big deal back then. The verdict section sums it up, saying it could have been better with some tweaks, but Naboo is still highly enjoyable, and a must for Star Wars fans. Overall, it gets a score of 78%, which is decent, not amazing, but solid enough. Looks like a good game to get stuck into if you're a Star Wars nut. The next page is a review section called Import Arena, and it's having a look at Scooby-Doo. Classic Creep Capers on the N64. Now this is an interesting one, because you'd think Scooby-Doo on the N64, that could be a bit of alright fun, couldn't you? Turns out, according to this review, not so much. Beer. They've given it a proper pasting, a 23% overall. Ouch. The review reckons it's a bit of a stinker, saying Terraglyph tried to cash in on the Scooby-Doo name but ended up with a rushed and shoddy game. They even say, and they would have gotten away with it too. Classic. The good points they can scrape together are just Scooby saying, Ruby Ruby Roo. Which, yeah, fair enough, it's Scooby-Doo. But the downsides are a bit more hefty. Apparently the camera is all over the place, the puzzles are banal boring, then the environments are unsettlingly static, and it completely misses the Scooby-Doo comedy vibe. Not good at all. They're comparing it to Resident Evil 2, saying it fancies itself as a cartoon version but fails miserably. They reckon the visuals get a 4 out of 5, which is alright I suppose. But the sounds are a 5 out of 5 in a bad way, being eerily silent except for the odd catchphrase. Mastery and lifespan both get a measly 2 out of 5, saying the downhill slalom section is hilariously bad and you'll be chucking it in after about 20 minutes to an hour and a half. Sounds like a real treat then, doesn't it? There's an infoburst section which tells you the game's from THQ, a 96 megabits cartridge, one player, uses 3 pages on the controller pack but no other pack support. It was out now in the US, due on March 30th in the UK, and TBA in Japan, costing a hefty £40. 40 quid for a 23% game? Blimey. Sounds like they were trying to pull a fast one on us Scooby fans. Mark Green is the reviewer, and he's not holding back, is he? Classic? Don't make us laugh. Pretty damning stuff. The screenshots don't look too bad to be fair, but if the gameplay's as rotten as they say, then no amount of nice graphics is gonna save it, is it? This page showcases the Import Arena section, and it's all about games that were initially released in Japan and America. Back in the day, if you were really keen and had a bit of extra cash, you might be tempted to import games before they came out here in the UK. They're having a look at Paper Mario, or Mario Story as it was known in Japan, for the N64. They've got a little previously an N64 section which is quite funny, showing off some of the quirky bits from the game. Looks like Mario's getting his fortune told by a Jawa-looking character, and there's a bit about Princess Peach being behind Bowser. Classic pantomime stuff. She's behind you. It mentions Mario going pop, in a Conker kind of way. Cheeky. They also point out you have to figure out what to do with items you collect, which is standard RPG fare really. Oh, and they mention Lucky Lester, or Lucky Lay as he was originally called in Japan. A cool character, part of Yoshi's Island they reckon. Then there's a badge feature, specifically the Attack FXC badge. Apparently it doesn't use up any badge points, but it adds weird noises to your hammer attacks. Sounds a bit daft, but intriguing I suppose. There's an info burst section which is basically game stats. Paper Mario's a 128 megabit cart, single player, needs 1 controller pack, cartridge save, no password or expansion pack needed. Rumble and transfer packs are also a no-go. It was already out in Japan and America at this point, and they reckon it would cost about 35 quid to import. The knowledge bit at the bottom is chatting about how they've been playing the import version of Paper Mario. They're saying if you like Mario games you should pick this one up. It was due out in September in the UK, so this was a bit of a heads up before release. They highlight the cast of characters and RPG elements, and joke about intelligent systems in jokes, typical Paper Mario humor, always a bit quirky. They even mention playing golf and tennis on the N64, and having parties, which is a nice little nostalgic nod to the N64 multiplayer days. All in all, it's a good preview of Paper Mario if you were considering importing it before the UK release. This page from the magazine is all about Paper Mario, which was a bit of a gem back in '01, wasn't it? It's pitched as a sequel to Super Mario RPG for the SNES, which was a classic, so expectations were high. The article highlights the game's unique 2D/3D look, describing Mario flipping like a piece of paper that was pretty novel at the time. They're talking about the badge system in a section called Collector, showcasing a few like Close Call, Ice Power, Payoff, I Spy, and Slow Go. They seem to be power-ups you collect. Close Call helps you dodge attacks when you're low on health. ICE Power is for dealing with shy guys. Payoff is about getting coins when you take damage. ISPY helps find hidden star pieces, and Slow Go is a freebie that stops Mario from running. Sounds like standard RPG fare, badges giving you different perks but in a Mario style. Warranty. There's a bit about combat charge moves, and how you need to master the action button, holding A, or using the analog stick to charge attacks. Apparently some moves need stick tapping, which could get a bit hand cramping like Mario Party they joke. They also mention sound effects from classic Nintendo games and tunes, specifically referencing Super Mario 64. The article is generally positive, saying it's got quirky characters, a funny script, and a colorful style. They mention companions with different attack styles and abilities to access new areas, and the badge system is highlighted as another innovation. It sounds like they reckon it's a good RPG to get stuck into and not wander aimlessly for hours, which, let's be honest, some RPGs were a bit guilty of. And of course, there's a big picture of Peach looking rather surprised by it all. It says N64 passport compatible, which meant you could play it on a UK console with a converter cartridge. All very exciting for us import fanatics back then. This page from the Import Arena section, aptly titled A Little Help, is all about Paper Mario on the N64, which was a bit of a gem, wasn't it? It's basically a guide to your chums who are going to lend a hand during your adventure. First up is Goombario, described as a filthy-looking spud. Charming. Apparently he's full of opinions, and is the first companion you meet. Then there's Koopa, a Koopa who's handy for grabbing items in his shell, a bit like a mobile home really. Bombette, rescued from Koopa's castle, is your pink Bob-omb pal who can blow up cracked walls, always useful for finding secrets. Paracari, the postman, joins to deliver letters, and his aerial antics are good against airborne enemies. Makes sense. What, a little shocker, is found in Shy Guy's toy box, and illuminates dark areas and delivers electric attacks. Finally, there's Bo, a Boo who can smack enemies and make Mario invisible, which is always a laugh. They've also got a pluses and minuses section. Pluses include beautifully balanced gameplay, sweet as a honey-drenched Pichu, bit flowery language for a games mag, even back then, and surprisingly novel. Minuses are simplistic platform elements, not exactly challenging, and moderately linear. Fair enough points, I suppose. If you like this, section recommends Yoshi's Story, another N64 platformer they gave 85% to. Called it surprisingly short-lived. Under visuals they call the flat style controversial but say it works brilliantly, scoring it an 8. Sounds gets a 9, saying typical Nintendo synths with pleasing effects. Mastery gets a 9 too, for cramming a lot onto the cart. Lifespan also gets a 9, estimating 40 hours of gameplay. The verdict sums it up as not as childlike as you might think, praising its blend of Nintendo ingenuity and solid gameplay. Top stuff, apparently. They slap a 90% on it, and give it a Star Game Award. Good score that, for what was a genuinely fantastic and quite quirky RPG back then. It mentions you get to play as Princess Peach at 1.2, which was a bit different. They reckon it's fun for all the family, a bit of a cliche but probably true enough. And they finish by saying, hold your breath until September. Teasing whatever was coming next, probably another import. This page is about Mega Man 64, looks like they are giving it a first look. They're calling it Giant Robots and Crazy Haircuts, which sums up Mega Man pretty well, doesn't it? It seems Capcom finally decided to bring it to the N64. Bit late in the day, as it was already out on the PlayStation. They're saying Mega Man, to his credit, has a big city to explore and surrounding areas, which is fair enough. The screens do show some decent-sized environments. They mention you get a motor and willing driver to ferry you about. Sounds like it's not all on foot. From the screenshots dotted around, it seems you'll be chatting to a news reporter, and there's some crazy getup this news reporter is wearing. You can enter your vehicle to save and upgrade, which is a standard these days. They warn about nasty robots in caves, and to keep on the move or you'll get bombed. Aiming is important as always, to increase blasting accuracy. Wild dogs are roaming the streets, naturally, and you can visit the junkyard for upgrades. Looks like you even have to save the mayor's house from pirates at some point. And there's a cute monkey called Data, who is a cute dancing monkey, apparently. Oh, and the city's mayor will help you on your quest. That's handy. Nos. The info burst gives us the facts. Capcom is the developer. It's a 128 megabits cartridge, one player only. Controller pack is a no, but cartridge save is a yes, thankfully. No password save, expansion pack, rumble pack or transfer pack. It was out now in the US and Japan, but TBA for the UK. Typical. Cost is $50, or about 34 quid. In the lifespan bit, they're talking about first impressions, and they're not too good if I'm honest. They say there's a worrying amount of pop-up and fog in the distance. The controls are mentioned too, saying the screen jerks from left to right, and it uses the D-pad instead of the analog stick which was on the PlayStation version. They reckon the first impressions are not great, but they hope you'll cast those frustrations aside. Well, we shall see, won't we? This page features the import arena section, and it's all about Mega Man 64, or Mega Man Legends as it was known in Japan and America, I think. The title screams, pesky pirates, and the game is reviewed under the heading, Can You Dig It? Gee. Seems like the chap reviewing it, Geraint Evans, is on the fence from the start. The review talks about battling pirates as the adventure progresses, describing them as proper pantomime villains, dumb, but cute and hapless. Apparently, Mega Man, or just Mega Man here, is a digger by trade, and he's after this legendary treasure called the Motherlode. It's all about treasure hunting and becoming friendly with the natives before those pesky pirates nick it for themselves. Looking at the pluses and minuses bit, the good points are basic fun, nicely challenging, and strangely involving. The bad points though, oof, they are hammering it. Criminal lack of analog control, calling it just a PlayStation port, unforgivable graphical niggles, and saying it never truly fulfills its potential. Ouch. There's a section if you like this, and they recommend Jet Force Gemini. Fair play. Jet Force Gemini was brilliant, rare at their absolute peak, and they correctly state it was rated 93% in issue 34 Good Memory There magazine, calling it the finest third-person shooter ever. Bit strong maybe, but it was definitely up there. Scores-wise, visuals get a 6, saying they are nicely styled but too basic for the N64. Sounds get a 7 for cutesy Japanese ditties, and decent voice acting. Mastery, a measly 2, saying the PlayStation can do it but they expected more from the N64, which is a bit harsh. Lifespan gets a 7, saying you'll play it to the end but not touch it again after. The final verdict is a 70%, with the reviewer saying it's not what we hoped for, but still surprisingly involving and good fun through to the end. So, a mixed bag then. Passport compatible too for those with a Japanese console, code E93D00540003F if you're interested in importing it. Dated April 2001. This page is the Club 64 section, right at the front of the N64 magazine. It's like their little club for N64 owners, telling you what's hot this month. The big headline screams, Sin and Punishment. Reckon that's the main game they're going on about. There's a screenshot from it. Looks like some sort of Japanese shooter. Never really took off here, did it? Says, sword skills sharpened and toughest bosses beaten. Sounds like they're giving tips for it. Then you've got the usual bits and bobs. Club 64 mailbox, page 54, must be letters from readers, probably moaning about something or other. How to be top duck in Donald Duck Quack Attack. On page 62, Donald Duck game. Seems a bit random to stick that in there. Probably a bit of a filler article if you ask me. Tips extra. On page 64. More tips then, because you can never have enough tips, can you? I'm the best. On page 68. Something about Zelda and Rush 2049 leagues. Bet that was full of playground arguments. Millennium Club. On page 72. For hardcore gamers, whatever that means. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic on page 75. Sounds like some agony aunt for gamers. Probably telling kids to go outside and get some fresh air. Directory on page 78. Game buying decisions made easier. Probably just a price list for games. And of course subscriptions. On page 94. Gotta get you to subscribe, haven't they? There's a little picture of the magazine cover. Looks like it's got Star Wars on it. That Phantom Menace game was probably still knocking about then. Page number 53 at the bottom. And it says April 2001, so that's when this issue came out. Pretty standard Club 64 page, really. This page is the Club 64 letters page. Proper bit of reader interaction in N64 Magazine. We've got a star letter here from Adam in Cornwall, who's showing off his impressive N64 collection. Spent a couple of grand on it since day one, bless him. He's got like 59 games, 5 controllers, rumble packs, transfer packs, the works, and he's arranged all his games and joypads to make the N64 logo dedication right there. Ed the editor reckons it's art. Can't argue with that. Then there's Greg from Basildon, wondering if anyone else got the Powerpuff Girls perfect pet joke in a previous issue. Apparently someone thought Bubbles from Powerpuff Girls sounded like a Koopa Trooper, referencing Mario Bros. 3 cartoons. Bit niche that, even for me, and I knew my cartoons back then. Ed seems a bit worried about Greg's cartoon knowledge, cheeky sod. There's a little box about Silent Bob, a Pokemon screenshot, labeled as Silent Bob. They're saying it was in issue 33, page 37, or the Game Boy camera shot in issue 37, page 46, and another Game Boy camera photo in issue 50. It's all a bit meta, referencing previous magazine issues and Kevin Smith films, probably referencing a slow, quiet Pokemon. Adrian from Wokingham is asking who the big Kevin Smith fan is. Ed's reply confirms it's about Kitsy's love for Kevin Smith movies like Mallrats and Clerks. Bit of an in-joke there. Snoogans, he says. Classic. Correction corner is up next, always needed in magazines. James from Southwell is correcting the Saiyan, spelling from issue 50, saying it's Saiyan-jin. But actually Saiyan is correct, so they got it right in the first place. Bit of a kerfuffle over nothing. Tony Pang's writing in about the Sin and Punishment review in issue 51, pointing out it was NTSC, not PL for Ridge Racer 64 developers. Someone got their wires crossed there. Then a reader is moaning about the Majora's Mask review in issue 50, saying there were 16 stray fairies mentioned when there are only 15. Someone's been counting fairies again. And finally, David Hardy is questioning a 40 rupee reward in the AZ of Majora's Mask book for knocking something out of a tree in Hyrule Field, asking if it should be Termina Field instead. Ed admits they're probably wrong, and will get someone else to deal with it, passing the buck nicely. Lastly, Musir from London is worried about GameCube mini DVD sizes, only 1.5 gigabytes compared to proper DVDs. He thinks GameCube games might end up on multiple discs. Ed reassures him 1.5 gigabytes is enough for most games, mentioning Majora's Mask is only 64 megabits on cartridge and GC discs are loads bigger. Size won't matter when it comes to GC titles, he quips. Reassuring stuff at the time. Looking back, mini DVDs were indeed fine for GameCube, weren't they? This page is the Club 64 mail section, full of reader letters, just like you'd expect. First up, someone's been tearing apart their old N64 controllers and found these plastic bits inside. They're wondering what they are, thinking maybe Nintendo and TDK had a falling out back in '97. Nah, turns out they're just insulators to stop electric shocks, although with the N64's low voltage it's not really needed. T had a falling out. Next, there's a letter comparing Dark Cloud on the PlayStation 2 to Zelda. This person reckons Dark Cloud is copying Zelda's control system and transparent maps. Bit of a stretch if you ask me, but each to their own. Quarry. Someone else is writing in about Rare's Dinosaur Planet. They think one of the characters looks just like Yamaneko from Chrono Cross. They've even included a little sketch. To be fair, there's a slight similarity. Ed's response is classic sarcasm though. Blown away? More like a light breeze. Then there's a lovely letter from someone who's been so inspired by the music in Zelda, Ocarina of Time, that they've made a piano book of the tunes. Fair play to them, that's dedication. Ed jokes that they now need a piano in the N64 office, and someone who can actually play it. Pia. Another reader is asking why they got rid of the recommended website bit in the directory section, and suggests featuring readers' websites instead. Not a bad shout actually. There's a picture of some Fimo clay models sent in by a reader. They've made Skull Kid and a member of the Deku tribe. They're all right, a bit rough around the edges, but you can see what they're meant to be. Moving on to game ideas. First up is Cope Monsnap. The idea is you're a traffic cop taking pictures of speeding motorists. Sounds a bit dull, doesn't it? Ed's reply is pretty dry, wondering if the reader has been caught speeding himself. Last game idea is Bar Manager 64 Feet. This one's about starting with an empty bar and building it up into a successful business, maybe even a nightclub or casino. Again, not exactly revolutionary, but Ed seems to think it could work, especially with a wide range of carpets. Cheeky. Oh, and right at the top, there's a little advert for a Zelda Ocarina of Time Easy Piano Song of Time book, which ties in nicely with that wondrous sounds letter. That's the page done then. This page of Club 64 is the letters page, always a good bit of banter to be had there. Someone called Roki Williams from Swansea wants his letter shown, and Ed, the editor, obliges with a simple, consider it shown. Peter Starr is asking about Mark Green's voice work for Grimshaw, in Perfect Dark, which is a good spot. James Kent is just a happy N64 player, bless him. Alan is apparently cute, but not as cute as Geraint, according to Sarah Ward. Then there's a suggestion for an N64 boy band, which is a laugh. Graham Mitchell thinks some of Ed's verdicts are silly, and Michael Rose reckons usernames and passwords unlock secret parts, which is a bit cryptic. Steve is asking true or false questions via email, and someone named Ause reckons Rogue Squadron's secret code is based on Yngwie Malmsteen, the guitar shredder, because of his track Rising Force, which is a deep cut. Michael Haber thinks the Gerudo Fortress music in Ocarina of Time is the same as Tecmo World Wrestling on the NES. Ed is rightly questioning that one. Finally, Philip Bennett can't find his car. Ed suggests it's where he left it. Classic. Way. Over on the right, we've got the Bargain Hunter section, highlighting cheap games. Electronics Boutique and Patrick Rosser in Exeter seem to be doing some good deals. Body Harvest, Wipeout 64, Quake 2, Turok, Rage Wars, and even Michael Owen's World League Soccer are all under a tenner. ePlay and Craig Towns in London are selling Quake 2, All-Star Tennis, Episode 1 Racer, and Mario Party 2 pre-owned for reasonable prices. There's a Pokemon trading card game gift box spotted at Bargain Hunters in Bath, good to know. The So Tell Me This section tackles reader questions. Alex Coling from Newcastle is asking about import converters for playing Japanese games and whether they need replacing. The answer is basically that the Passport version 3 should last indefinitely. Richard Stratton is wondering about batteries in cartridges for save data and how long they last. The reply confirms batteries are in there and will eventually die, potentially taking save data with them. Jeremy Davies from Chichester is asking about future games, like Futurama and GameCube games. The answer mentions Futurama is due out soon, and talks about next-generation consoles and Scandinavian coders. Carl Thompson from Manchester wants to know if Bomberman 64, the second attack, is coming to the UK. The answer is a firm rubbish. It's apparently not worth worrying about. John Sharples from Preston wants Rare's address to send fan mail, and it's provided along with a "Don't tell them we sent you" warning. There are also some quick-fire questions at the bottom about Shadow Man 2 on GameCube, GameCube polygon limits, and Namco's projects. Finally, there's a small This Article section, mentioning a story in the Daily Mail about a mother claiming her son tried to kill her because of the N64. The editor jokes about the picture being the best bit, morbid sense of humor there. This page of the N64 magazine, dated April 2001, is the letters page, called The Board. We start with a chuckle, about a letter from Ross McFarlane from Knaresborough, about the boy addicted to his Nintendo. Turns out the lad is pictured clutching a PlayStation controller. Bit of an own goal there. The editor has a bit of fun with that. Next up it's Even Navi, featuring Anton dressed as Link from Zelda. He's got the Deku stick, a dagger, and the snowman mask, clearly a fan of Majora's Mask. The editor wonders if this is a hint at what Zelda might look like on the GameCube. Then Daryl Williams from Reading is asking about Ridge Racer V for the GameCube and Killer Instinct 3. The mag confirms Ridge Racer V is definitely a PlayStation 2 game, and reckons a GameCube version is unlikely. They mention that Ken Lobb from Nintendo confirmed Killer Instinct 3 ages ago, but it never appeared on the N64, so maybe it's a GameCube thing, but who knows with Nintendo sometimes, eh? They also mention no Namco games officially announced for GameCube yet. Just skay. Butiluka via email wants to know about the Datil Equalizer VRAM viewer. Basically, it's a cheat device add-on that lets you see the graphics stored on the N64 cartridge, so you can look at textures, characters, and stuff that isn't normally visible in the game. Apparently, it only really works for 2D graphics and can't handle hidden 3D objects still. Sounds like a bit of a nerdy toy for those who are that way inclined. Hey you gay. There's a section praising a Nintendo World drawing, saying it's not done by Will, but by Richard Brady from Essex, and Ivan Kolik from Croatia did a great job. They ask readers to count how many characters and references they can spot in. It looks like a busy picture with loads of Nintendo characters all crammed in. A picture from Mike Laramam is featured. Apparently he should be happy with that. Then there's a drawing called Poke Force Gemini by Rebecca Thompson from Kent, linking Pokemon F-Zero and Jet Force Gemini. A bit of a mashup then. Finally there's The Last Thing Many a Datadyne Guard Sees, which is a perfect dark drawing by Brian Keelt from Company. Apparently Derry drew it. Cheers Derry! Right at the bottom they've got the address for sending in your own Nintendo-related stuff for the next issue. This page in N64 Magazine issue 53 is all about how to get to grips with the Japanese import shooter, Sin and Punishment, a real hardcore game on the N64. They're calling it How to Eliminate the Hardcore, which is a bit dramatic, but fair enough, it's a tough game. Apparently, the spiky-haired manga trio are trying to save the planet in it, according to the text. Geraint Evans is the writer for this piece. There's a What We Said section, which looks back at their review in issue 51, where they gave it a whopping 89%. They called it a simply stunning shoot-'em-up, and said it was essential if you had an NTSC machine or converter cart. That's right, back then you had to jump through hoops to play games from other regions. Wasn't as simple as nowadays, eh? The main part of the page is general tips. They're giving advice on swordplay, basically saying don't rely just on your blaster. The sword is much more useful for close combat and deflecting projectiles. It's the most powerful weapon they reckon, so get handy with it. Then there's lock-on. They're saying don't get too reliant on the lock-on as it's the weakest option for taking out multiple enemies. The normal red crosshair is better for damage, especially on harder levels and for high scores. That's interesting, always good to know the nuances. Movement is next, and the tip is about concentrating on where you're aiming while also being aware of incoming lasers. You need to keep a mental note of where those lasers are coming from, and learn to dodge or bat them back with your sword. Sounds intense. Finally, enemies. They say to be mindful of your kill count as it affects your credits. If you're running low, focus on the weaker enemies as every 100 kills gets you an extra continue. Pick off the smaller enemies early on to avoid trouble later. Good solid advice there. Crits. There are screenshots throughout illustrating the tips, showing the gameplay in action. Oh, and there's a N64 passport compatible badge with the code E93D054003F. That's for playing it on a UK machine with a converter cartridge, specifically version 3 only, apparently. Those were the days of messing about with converter carts, remember those? Complicated times, but worth it for games like Sin and Punishment, I suppose. The next page we've got here is all about boss tactics for, let's have a look, Tokyo's most wanted armed volunteers aircraft. It's from Sin and Punishment, that bonkers shooter from Treasure. They're giving tips on how to deal with 4 bosses, Centipede Seema, Radan, Kachua, and Leda. First up is Centipede Seema. Apparently not too tough. The advice is to go for the legs for extra points, and if you're after credits just blast away at the background insects until the clock's almost out. Efficient, if a bit cheeky. Orangey. Then there's Radan, who they say is also not too tricky. The trick is to go to the back of the building, double jump to dodge its head attacks, then rush in with your sword. When it turns blue and invincible, back off and repeat. Seems straightforward enough. Borintensball. Next is Kachua. They're saying to rack up kills on the soldier drones at the start for points, then focus on Kachua. When she hides behind fiery waves, lock onto a green orb, and stay central. Apparently there's also a robot Kachua bit, where you need to lock on and strafe from side to side while firing like a lunatic. Right then, rescue. Finally, Leda, the robot kitty. They say it can be frustrating, but quick to dispatch if you know how. Wait for it to hit the floor in the middle, then target the propeller pod on its face, hitting every other one as you strafe. Once it jumps around, time your jumps to be in the air when it hits the top of the poles and whack it with your sword. Madness but effective apparently. There's also a little score booster box mentioning that you can delay bosses to get more kills from background enemies for a higher score. Smart thinking that. All in all, some handy tips for anyone struggling with those Sin and Punishment bosses. Mental game that it is. This page of Club 64 is all about getting you through the tricky bits in Space Station Silicon Valley. Remember that one? Right laugh that game was. It's got tips for a bunch of the bosses you face. First up they're talking about deflect and destroy mechanics, saying to look out for things you can deflect to take out enemies and scenery. Good for points apparently, especially in the flagship battle and those Tokyo levels. Always good to max out your score in it. Then it's on to the Armed Volunteers Weapon Boss, or AVW as they call it. They're telling you to stick to the middle of the screen, take out the gun turrets first, and focus fire. Standard boss tactics really, but good to be reminded. Next is the Anemone Seamer. Speed's the name of the game for this fella apparently. Gotta be nippy, destroy its legs, and watch out for projectiles. Jumping and positioning, sounds about right, Bond style. After that, it's the Crawfish Seamer. They reckon if you concentrate on the road, it should be a doddle. Just stay on the path, strafe, jump gaps, and watch out for mines. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy as they say. Oint? Then we've got Brad and Leader. Annoying pair these two. The tip is to take out Leader first, before you even bother with Brad. Once Leader's gone, it's all about mashing that Z trigger to get the sword locks on Brad and give him a good smack. For the sentry machinery, it's all about taking out the little sentries first, the smaller siblings they call them, before the main one. Dodge the bombs by staying in the gaps, and apparently you can deflect bombs with your sword, useful to know. Finally, it's the Polestar. They say don't lock on for this one, which is a bit odd, but apparently you won't have enough firepower. Just follow the bomb, get close enough, and then use your sword and strafe to hit it 3 times. If your aim is good, apparently it's a goner on the 3rd pass. Sounds a bit finicky, but there you go. All in all, a decent little guide for getting through some of those tougher bosses in Space Station Silicon Valley. Good times. This page is all about how to eliminate the hardcore in Sin and Punishment. Looks like a tips guide for getting through this tough as nails shooter. They're breaking down sections of the game starting with Birth Model, which is apparently a boulder pile boss. The advice is to aim for its purple eye and deflect projectiles back at it. Sounds like typical treasure boss design, gotta find the weak point and exploit it. Next up is Spider, Seemer, a 3-stage beastie. For stage 1, strafe while shooting, classic stuff. Stage 2, keep moving to avoid minions, and concentrate fire on the spider. Stage 3, they say to aim at the bins and trigger, then hit the seamer, all while watching out for its streamer attack. Sounds like a bit of a bullet hell moment, par for the course with Sin and Punishment. Then there's Final Stretch, which isn't a boss specifically, but just some general tips for racking up points. They mention lumbering lizard enemies are good for points, and to go for snakes with your sword for even more score. Basically just blast everything and grab bonus icons. Solid advice for any shooter really. Finally, Earth Mimicry, which is the Earth's doppelganger, sounds like a tough end of level encounter. The tip is to keep your aim central to hit it, deal with the constant missile stream by sweeping arcs, and watch out for green meteors that explode. They even mention faster missiles you probably can't intercept. Good luck with that then. Ari. There's also a little enemy conservation box, basically saying don't be a bullet sponge. Assess the situation, pick off enemies on vehicles one by one, and apparently blowing up lifts in the shaft section can get you multiple kills. Every little helps, eh? And a score booster. Banner at the top, gotta love those point multipliers. All in all, a decent set of tips for surviving Sin and Punishment. You'll need them for sure, that game's brutal. This page is a how-to guide you see for Donald Duck. Quack Attack on the N64 classic Disney platforming fare. It's all about being the top duck. Written by Alan Madrell, it's giving some premium tips, and they even joke about sending you the bill. Cheeky. Cheer. They've got a What We Said section, referring back to their review in issue 49, where they gave it 69%. The review summary is pretty blunt, saying it's competent enough but lacks originality and challenge, and really only for younger Disney fans. Ouch. Harsh but fair perhaps. They've broken down some gameplay tips into sections. Search is about keeping your eyes peeled for hidden stuff. Avoid is about not being heroic and just jumping over enemies. Walk is advising to take it slow and steady, because you might fall down unexpected holes. Standard platforming advice really, but nicely presented with screenshots of the game. The tone is pretty light-hearted and aimed at the magazine's audience, which back then, we were all soaking up every bit of N64 info we could get. Donald Duck. Quack Attack, yeah, it was alright for what it was. A bit on the easier side maybe, but bright and colourful Disney fun for the kids really. Not exactly pushing the N64 to its limits, but a decent game for the younger audience back in the day. This page showcases some handy hints and tips for Donald Duck. Going Quackers. Right at the top, it's got a section called Highlights showing little secrets to find in different levels. For Forest Edge, it mentions an extra life hidden underground on the right, easily missed apparently. Then for Dangerous Cliff, it says to go right when the branch splits to find some goodies. On track there's another extra life under a rock near a spiky plant. Areolas. Moving down to Duckburg, it points out a life in urban high-rises you get, with a springboard and another spellbook in rooftops, hidden under a platform in a nearby building. Then on the roofs, you can jump up after some revolving platforms to grab an extra life. Next up is Haunted House. With a life on ghostly path you need to use an evil bat to reach. Quite standard platforming fare. After the spiky coffins in creepy corridor, there's a toy and spellbook directly underneath, which is a bit obvious really. And finally for Eerie Alley, you need to get to where the path splits high and low, and on the lower level is the spellbook for the lonely toy. The last section is Murloc's Temple. On Ancient Fate, there are hovering platforms with an extra life at the highest point. On Murky Way, you can peek under some rolling platforms that lead down for another life. And on Artifact Way, after the springy hand blocks, you can either go up or down, and there's a toy found on the way up using the left hand blocks. Finally there's a section on bosses, covering Bernadette the Bird, Beagle Boy, Magica Dispel, and Murloc. For Bernadette it says to duff up the chicks when they hatch and double leap on her head. For Beagle Boy, avoid his wrecking ball, double jump to smack him about, and punch the wad of cash. Magica Dispel needs you to punch a pumpkin, avoid electric attacks, and kick bombs into gates. And for Murloc, you've got to punch switches, shoot him, jump over flames and avoid flame pillars. Standard boss fight stuff really. It's all pretty straightforward, but back in the day, these little tips were gold dust if you were stuck on a level or boss. Donald Duck, Going Quackers was a decent platformer for the N64, a solid rental at least. Nice to see them giving it some love in the magazine. This page of the magazine is all about tips for a few cracking N64 games. First up there's WWF No Mercy, with some advice on how to lose easily if you really need to, which is a bit daft isn't it, but also how to cheese a win in a tag team match with submission holds. Then we've got Zelda, Majora's Mask. They're showing a glitch to escape Clocktown as Deku Link without any aggro from enemies by nudging a guard, and a simple tip about not getting hurt by your own bombs if you face away and use your shield. Obvious really, but helpful for the young'uns maybe. Moving on, there's Mario Tennis. They're talking about easy wins in doubles by rushing the net with a computer partner, and a reminder that you can change the camera angle if you've forgotten. A good tip is using flying characters on Bowser's Slippy Court. Makes sense to me. Finally, Pokemon Stadium gets a look in with some recommended Pokemon and movesets for taking on the Gym Leader Castle, like Mewtwo, Articuno, Jolteon, Starmie, Executor, and Gengar. Strong lineup that. Apparently you get a special title screen if you beat both the Gym Leader Castle and the Stadium mode. Nice little bonus. This page is all about tips and tricks for some top N64 games. Number 5 is Pokemon Snap, suggesting you can get a massive score for Psyduck by waiting for it to leap out of the river and then pelting it with a pester ball or apple. Bit mean to Psyduck, innit? But hey, gotta get those points. G. Number 6 is The World Is Not Enough, and this one's about the Thames Chase level. The tip is to wait for the assassin at the start to get a good head start, and then grab the better weapons like the Raptor Magnum later on. Good shout, those early pistols are a bit rubbish, aren't they? Jut. Number 7 is Tigger's Honey Hunt, and it seems to be a bit of a wind-up. It talks about honeypot arrows pointing to hidden goodies, but then says to just ignore them until you have more abilities later in the game. So, not really a tip for now, is it? More like a remember this for later kind of thing. Number 8 is Power Rangers, and it's about finding power-ups. Apparently, enemy generators are stuffed with goodies. The advice is to keep your distance, blast the generators, and then grab the power-ups when it's safe. Makes sense, don't want to get swamped by those goons. Number 9 is Perfect Dark, and this one's about the Mayan SOS level. The tip is to save your Psychosis gun ammo for the chap with the golden DY357s. Apparently, one shot will sort him out and get you a useful companion. Psychosis gun, what a weapon, eh? Number 10 is Mario Party 2, specifically the shell-shocked minigame. The tip is to just loiter in a corner if you're playing on your own, as the computer players will mostly ignore you, then you can zoom in for the kill when there's only a couple left. Bit cheap if you ask me, but hey, a win's a win. Shoo. Then there's a tip for the top section about Pokemon Puzzle League. It mentions unlocking Puzzle League Uni if you're struggling with the undergraduate course, and gives a button combo to skip levels, Z, and then A, B, R, A at the title screen. Also, there's a cheat to make Jigglypuff sing if you do a combo or chain. And the bigger the combo, the longer the song. Sweet. Finally, it mentions messing up the game by going to the Profiles section and pressing R until you get to Mewtwo. Then holding Z and pressing A, B and R to replace the profile pictures with title screen images. and it gets all peculiar when the characters come up. Says just reset the game to fix it. Sounds like a right laugh, might give that a go later. This page is the reader's top 15 tips section, a classic feature where readers shared their best kept secrets for N64 games. Kicking things off at number 1 is a tip for WWF WrestleMania, advising players to climb the turnbuckle and taunt to easily activate their special move and win. Following that, for Perfect Dark on Carrington Villa, someone discovered you can use a cheat to wield a weapon with a threat detector, and find it in the windmill with the drug spy. Another Perfect Dark tip for the airbase level shows how to pull out the horizon scanner and zoom in to bring up the menu, a bit of a weird one. Next up is WWF No Mercy again, with a tip about executing the worm on Hottie, and for Biofreaks, a rather cheeky tip to simply turn off shields in the options to win easily on any difficulty. We then move on to the game Twine, with a couple of tips for levels like A Sinking Feeling and The Courier. Seems like stealth was key in that game. More WWF No Mercy tips follow. Seems like that game was ripe for exploiting. There's a Turok Rage Wars cheat for infinite ammo and all weapons, which was always welcome back then in those chaotic multiplayer matches. Then a couple of tips for Zelda, Majora's Mask, one involving Goron Link at Romani Ranch and another about seeing Link's tunic during the cruise in Southern Swamp. A bit of an odd one, but those Zelda games were full of secrets. A Donkey Kong 64 multiplayer tip and another one for Twine on the cold reception level, and lastly a Pokemon Stadium tip about getting the Dragon Rage TM in the Pika Cups. At the bottom it mentions sending in your own tips to win an Action Replay Equalizer Extreme and an N64 badge, which was a cool bit of kit to have back then. There's even a form to fill out and send in if you had any top tips to share yourself. This page is all about proving you're the best gamer in it. Right at the top it's shouting "I'm the best" in massive letters, so no messing about then. They're starting up these new leagues and want your high scores for a bunch of games. Pokemon Snap, Perfect Dark. Always a good shout for showing off. Majora's Mask of course, Twine, which is a bit of an odd one to include there, Rush 2049, now that's a proper game, and Mickey's Speedway, so a real mix, Bearjorgi. Then there's a star performance bit about Mario Golf. Seems someone called Warren Bright has been setting some impressive scores. They reckon if you're good enough, you can send in your scores, and maybe win a surprise. Always good to get a bit of free swag. Bray, new high score section next, talking about Rush 2049 and Mickey Speedway again. Apparently this Geraint fellow had a good run on Rush but got beat on Mickey Speedway by Michael Rose from Manchester. They're making a fuss about it anyway. Warrington. There's a this month's score to beat section which is Mickey Speedway again. They've got a screenshot of the game, and a time to beat of 35.91 seconds, which is Geraint's old time. They reckon if you beat it you'll win a mystery game. Sounds like a challenge. And finally, a big track and field section with loads of tables. Looks like they've been running their own little Olympics. They've got results for things like the 100 meters dash, breaststroke, hurdles, jumps, all that. Loads of names and places listed, mostly from around London and up north, places like Bolton and Lincoln. Seems like Edward Smith from Trowbridge is doing pretty well in the championship event, whatever that is. A good bit of competition for the readers. Get involved and show off your skills. This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a regular feature I remember well from N64 Magazine. It's basically a problem page for gamers who are stuck in their N64 games. We've got questions about a few games here. Someone's struggling to find the mirror shield in Majora's Mask, classic Zelda puzzle that one. Dr. Kits is telling him it's in Ikana Canyon tunnels, and involves bottle pose and lighting torches. Sounds about right. Someone else is asking how to unlock Luigi in Super Smash Bros., which is a bit of a secret character at the time. You had to beat bonus practice 1 with all 8 original characters, fair enough. There's also a question about Perfect Dark, finding some experimental tech on Datadyne research level. Dr. Kits is giving directions through security doors and past sentry guns to find a shield must be some sort of objective item. Those Perfect Dark levels were proper mazes, weren't they? And lastly, someone stuck on Xiphias in Turok 3. Apparently you gotta shoot him in the eye, use the tech bow and watch out for tentacles. Sounds like a typical Turok boss battle, loads of shooting. At the bottom there's a cutout coupon for sending in your own questions to Dr. Kits if you're having a gaming affliction, they called it. Good times. This page is an introduction to Nintendo UK proper. Apparently they finally decided to set up shop here, ditching their old distributor, The Games, after about a decade. It's about time really, feels like we've been getting the short end of the stick for ages with release dates and game availability. They're saying this means direct links to the big Nintendo hubs in Germany, America and Japan, so hopefully, we'll get games quicker and more teleads. About time they started treating the UK market seriously. It's written by Mark Green, and they've got Mario and Toad welcoming us to the new office. Let's hope it makes a difference. and we're not still waiting months for games that America got ages ago. This page delves into some of the burning questions we all had for Nintendo back in the day. Remember the wait for games in the UK? Always felt like we were last to the party. Apparently it wasn't Nintendo UK's fault entirely. It was down to this PAL versus NTSC thing, and also decisions made over in Europe. They even held back Majora's Mask for Easter to shift more copies, which, yeah, fair enough I suppose, gotta make money. They were aiming for simultaneous releases with the US for the Game Boy Advance though. Ambitious that, good on them if they managed it. Then there's the stock shortages, especially at Christmas. Expansion packs were like gold dust, weren't they? Apparently it was a balancing act, figuring out how many games to bring over from Japan and then divvying them up between shops based on sales figures. Makes sense, I guess. But now the UK was an official offshoot, getting stock was meant to be easier, about time too. Finally, the big question. A proper Nintendo UK website. For ages we had to make do with the European one, which wasn't exactly tailored for us. They were promising a proper UK site to rival the amazing Nintendo of America one, which felt like a dream at the time. They said it was coming soon. We were always waiting for soon from Nintendo, weren't we? At least they suggested checking out www.nintendo.co.uk, which probably wasn't much cop at the time, but hey, a promise is a promise. This page reckons to tackle some of the burning questions about the N64 at the time. First up, they're asking if games will ever get cheaper. They quote some bloke called Tom Pierce who says if you're a big chain store you'll be hearing a lot from him. Apparently they're trying to make bargains easier to find, especially with older games. They even mention you could find F1 World Grand Prix in Woolworths for a tenner bargain bucket stuff really. They reckon shops will be more inclined to drop the prices on games. Now they're focusing on bestsellers like Banjo-Tooie and Mario Party 3. Fair enough, those were the big hitters. They also mention Quake 2 doing well after shops discounted it, which makes sense. That game was brilliant even then. Then there's a question about who's making sure shops still bother with N64. Apparently, a chap called Andy Yates is the man. He helps shops maximize their shelf space. It sounds like Nintendo UK changed how they dealt with shops, making it easier for them to stock N64 games, instead of having to go through some big distributor called THE. A bloke named Philip Stevens is also mentioned. He looks after the big chains and sorts out displays and events. They even mention if a shop wanted Meowth to turn up for the launch of Pokemon Gold and Silver, his department would handle it. Talk about dedication, eh? There's even a picture of a POS catalogue full of Pokemon tat. No surprises there, John. Finally, they ask how much life is left in the N64. Andy Yates seems pretty positive, says there's still excitement for the N64 even with the Game Boy Advance and GameCube on the horizon. He reckons Pokemon games keep everything feeling fresh, which is probably true. Those things were still selling like hotcakes. Some other bloke, Darren Gorton, chimes in and says he's proud the N64 lasted so long, and they're still selling loads of big games. They reckon it'll continue for the year, and THQ are still committed to it, so Nintendo UK is saying there's plenty of life left in the old chunky plastic console yet. And to finish it off, there's a picture of some Pikachu inflatable mascot doing its thing. Must have been some sort of shop event. Looks like they were trying to keep the N64 party going. This page is a big interview with Shelley Friend, who is apparently Nintendo of Europe's head of PR. She's talking about all sorts of stuff, mostly about the upcoming consoles and games. Koala. First up, they ask about the lack of N64 consoles after Christmas. Apparently they had a really good Christmas, but ran out of stock. Good news though, it's all replenished now, and there's still life in the old N64 yet. They've got Pokemon Puzzle League, and Rare's Banjo-Tooie coming soon, which is decent. Banjo-Tooie, that was a long time coming, wasn't it? Warrensiger. Then it's on to the Game Boy Advance and GameCube, naturally. They're trying to get simultaneous releases in the US and UK, which is a bit of a change. She reckons Nintendo wants to be seen as more than just kiddie games. They want everyone to enjoy their stuff. Sounds like PR speak to me, but fair enough. Warrington, UK. Apparently Nintendo of America are chucking a load of cash at marketing these new consoles, like $400 million. Blimey. They're expecting to shift 750,000 Game Boy Advances this year, but no guesses on the GameCube yet. She mentions that the N64 had a bit of a comeback thanks to Pokemon Stadium, which is true, that game was massive for a while. They're really pushing the link up between the Game Boy Advance and GameCube, saying it's revolutionary, being able to download data and continue gaming on the go. It's a good idea, I suppose. TAD. When asked about pitfalls for the GameCube launch, she just says, "The world is not ready for such a great product." Bit cocky that, but you gotta admire the confidence, I suppose. She says they've learned from Sega's mistakes and will just focus on making good games. Well, that's the idea, isn't it? Japan is apparently all about the Game Boy Advance, America is going for the mature GameCube games, but Europe is trying to keep the message consistent. She went to the Nuremberg Toy Fair, where they showed off the Game Boy Advance, and she's raving about Mario Kart Advance and Kururin. Mario Kart on the go does sound pretty good, to be fair. Warrington Nuremberg? Overall mood at Nintendo UK seems pretty hyped. 2 new consoles on the way. Big year for Nintendo. And when are these consoles out and how much will they cost? Be patient, you'll find out soon. Typical. Meh. There are a few screenshots on the page too. There's Link, looking very Ocarina of Time-ish. Then Luigi, looks a bit spooky, must be Luigi's Mansion. And of course pictures of the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube itself. Purple consoles, very 2001. In it? This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, and blimey does it take you back. Right in your face is Banjo-Tooie, finally arriving in the UK it says. Remember the wait for that one? Rare were the kings back then, and Banjo-Kazooie was amazing, so the hype for Tooie was massive. Animal cracker they call it, bit daft. But you knew what they meant. They're promising a colossal review, which you'd expect. Everyone was gagging to know if it lived up to the first game. Down at the bottom they've got Pokemon Gold and Silver mentioned as well. Tons of new monsters, and a massive GB review. Gold and Silver were huge, everyone was playing them on their Game Boys, catching them all and all that. Good times. It's issue 53 apparently, and they're calling themselves the UK's best-selling independent. Fair play to them. Planet N64 logo in the corner as well, that was their brand. Right then, let's see what's inside. This page, blimey, it's issue 54, right in your face, isn't it? Tipped! It screams, with a picture of Conker looking proper angry. Seems they've got an 18 rated guide for Conker's Bad Fur Day. Cheeky for a Nintendo mag back then, eh? Below that, it's all about the game reviews they've crammed in. Looks like they're giving their verdicts on Indiana Jones, Aiden Chronicles, and Custom Robo V2. Got little screenshots to tempt you in. Then you've got Polaris Snowcross, Super Bowling, and Backstage Assault getting the once-over as well. A right mixed bag of games there, some decent, some matey. Well, you know, rattle. On the right, in those yellow blobs, it's the usual magazine fodder Skill Club Millennium, new tips and cheats, special investigations, and the latest on the GameCube and GBA. Standard stuff really, but we lapped it up back then, didn't we? They're claiming they're the only reviews you can trust. Always a bit of a laugh when they say that, isn't it? Big yellow box shouts, absolutely free. And it's on about a cracking book with tips for the biggest game of 2001. Which you'd imagine is Conker, wouldn't you? This simply must not be missed, they're saying. Always laying it on thick, these mags. Hoo 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 hoo. Next month in Game Boy section teases reviews of Zelda GBC and Pocket Soccer Aliens. Classic Game Boy titles, takes you back. And it's all on sale Tuesday the 10th of April from Nintendo Magazine. Proper old school logo there. Right at the bottom corner it says April 2001 and page number 97 for the real nerds keeping track. Good times.